Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins in New Zealand, where the company Benthic operates an ocean mining base. The machines are remotely controlled by Charisse and Riley, who are currently watching an interview with the boss, Billy Ford. Reporter Susan questions the company's actions and asks if the results justify the damage to the region's biodiversity, where many species do not exist anywhere else. Ford defends the company and emphasizes the importance of progress, stating that mineral resources are also significant. In the control room, Charisse convinces Riley to collect a sample despite not having permission to do so. However, they barely start when something strange appears on the screen. For a moment, the ocean floor seems to be moving, and soon after, the screen goes black, and the signal is lost. Still talking to Susan, Ford proposes to show a bit of the ocean's beauty to the viewers and heads to the control room, to Charisse's despair. She explains that they are without a signal, but Ford clearly does not understand the gravity of the situation, saying that the signal does that sometimes and will come back. Forced to be more direct, Charisse interrupts her boss and warns that there's a big problem. The mining robot that stopped responding is the Deep Digger, which costs about $1 billion. Without blaming anyone for the incident, Ford recruits the two technicians for the robot's rescue operation. Captain Hansen is already waiting for Ford on the boat and informs him that there is one more passenger. Sarah Murray is a representative of the International Seabed Authority and her presence on this expedition is mandatory. Ford is not very happy, but is forced to accept her on board, and the two soon begin to get to know each other better. Sarah admits that this is not her dream job and says she has a degree in geomythology, an obscure field that mixes legends and science. It doesn't take long for them to arrive at their destination coordinates, and Charisse scans the area with sonar. When the images start coming in, Charisse becomes intrigued with what she sees. There is a volcano on the ocean floor, but it looks like something has recently destroyed a large part of it, and even the Deep Digger wouldn't have that much force. Riley expresses his concerns about safety when Ford decides to go down there to investigate personally. Ford says he can stay on the boat if he wants, but the young man decides to board the submersible with the rest of the team. During the descent, he is astonished by the topography around him, as everything seems to have changed radically since their last image. Only when we see the submersible from the outside does the situation become clear. This is not ocean topography, but the body of a gigantic animal. However, they still do not know this, and Ford inadvertently awakens the beast by turning on the front lights. From the passenger's perspective, what happens next looks like a tsunami. However, they soon realize they are being pulled to the surface at high speed. As the creature begins to emerge from the water, we see it as a mix of an octopus and a starfish. Its size is so colossal that Hansen's boat looks like a toy in comparison. Reaching the surface, the four passengers are awestruck by its proportions. Ford says it can only be one of the legendary monsters of the Pacific, known as Siau. Sarah then recalls indigenous legends about a giant creature born from the fire of the sea, which could mean a volcano in the ocean. The submersible is right on top of one of the arms, and Riley is about to have a nervous breakdown, wanting to get out of there. Over the radio, Hansen asks Ford what the hell they are doing on top of the monster, and he doesn't know how to respond to that. Then one of the arms fully rises, and the captain hurriedly maneuvers in a nearly impossible way. The arm crashes into the sea, creating a 40-meter wave that only doesn't swallow the boat due to Hansen's incredible skill. Knowing that the wave isn't going to stop anytime soon, Ford informs the authorities that a tsunami will hit the shore in 1 hour. He also warns that there is a Siau nearby and requests that someone contact General Horn from the Navy. Riley tries to control the panic while Ford and Sarah peek outside. It is then that military jets arrive and, to their horror, begin dropping bombs on the Siau. As if that weren't bad enough, the attack also reveals that the giant star's blood is made of magma. Ford returns to the radio and asks to stop the bombing, but they soon stop responding. Realizing they will have to save themselves, the group decides to use the thrusters to get out of the area. The strategy is risky and involves traveling part of the star's arm. Fortunately, after some bumps, the submersible successfully returns to the water. However, Sarah spots a war submarine approaching, ready to launch torpedoes. Charisse does her best to get the submersible out of there as the attack begins and manages to take them to a safe distance with Ford's help. The The submarine has nowhere to escape when a colossal arm rises against it. After the impact, Ford tries to check if anyone survived and if there is anything they can do to help, but Charisse says nothing is left. Then they return to the surface and calculate that the Siau will reach the coast in about 6 hours. According to Sarah, the legends about this creature coincide with a period when the Pacific Islands were almost entirely devastated. Historians say the cause may have been an earthquake or tsunami, but now Sarah has other hypotheses. At that moment, General Horn finally begins to call them over the radio. Ford cooperates with the Navy and explains everything they know so far. He warns that the animal's skin is made of volcanic silica, which makes attacks useless, as the internal lava quickly cauterizes the wounds. Horn thanks him for the tips but orders Ford to get out of there and not get involved in military matters. He also warns that he will investigate the cause of all this. If there is evidence that the company's activities are linked to the monster's arrival, Ford and his team will go to prison. Unwilling to accept this, Ford asks who would be up for an independent operation to combat the Siau. The other three agree with the idea, and Hansen also shows up to help. Sarah mentions that she had a teacher named Rina Hangaroa, the only one in geomythology who believed in the existence of Siau. She was ousted from academic life because of her unusual beliefs, and to this day, she lives as a recluse on the South Island. Ford says that Rina is probably the only person in the world who can help him, and even though there are no means to contact her, they could simply go there by helicopter. Then Sarah reveals that there is one more reason not to do that. It was she who questioned the validity of Rina's research, as she thought such theories were a waste of her tuition. In other words, the scholar will not be very happy to see the student who ruined her career again. Ford bluntly says that is precisely why Sarah should try to redeem herself with her teacher. Thus, the four say goodbye to Hansen and board the helicopter. Charisse notes that the creature feeds on byproducts from volcanoes and its metabolism requires immense amounts of energy. Therefore, it must be searching for a nutrient source that meets those requirements. Riley argues that the Siau may have emerged for a series of other reasons, not just feeding, but Ford insists that they need to work with the little information they have. With 5 hours remaining until the Siau reaches the shore, Ford's team returns to the control room, and Sarah heads to the South Island, summoning the courage to face her teacher. Rina Hangaroa is already at the door when the helicopter arrives, as her house is the only one in the most remote valley on the island and the visit can only be for her. Seeing Sarah, she warns that she will not change anyone's final grades. But when her former student explains the situation, Rina quickly changes her tone. Asking questions and drawing sketches, she manages to identify the Siau as the legendary Tengu, a name that means the destroyer. It lives beneath the Earth's crust and feeds on volcanic substrate. All records of its appearances coincide with the fall of an entire civilization. Sarah says this could have occurred due to a lack of technology and, therefore, the chances now are better. Rina explains that this will not make a difference and notes that even current civilization has never been able to prevent any volcanic eruption. The only thing that can face the Tengu is another equally powerful Siau, known as the Walking Mountain. Also known as the Siau Slayer, this being hibernates in the depths of the earth, waiting for the Tengu's return to defeat it once again. Meanwhile, at Benthic, Charisse and Riley are using underwater drones to learn more about the anatomy of the gigantic animal that is still heading toward the coast. Ford insists on getting a closer look, trying to discover any kind of weak point, and the penultimate available drone ends up being lost. Still calculating nutritional needs, Charisse concludes that the initial estimate was far too low. If the Siau is looking for food, its target must be the supervolcano Taupo in the Auckland region. Its last eruption was 70,000 years ago, and the event completely devastated New Zealand, covering the North Island in ash. Although currently inactive, this would be the kind of volcano capable of feeding that creature. Ford tries to contact General Horn again, but no one takes him seriously and they don't even transfer the call, even when he says that an eruption of that magnitude would create a nuclear winter scenario around the globe. At the same time, Rina is taking Sarah to Motu Tanawa, which means Island of Monsters. This is the location indicated in various writings as the home of the fearsome Walking Mountain. The professor explains that not every Siau is an enemy of humans, but Sarah is clearly afraid of awakening a second threat. While they search for an epic solution, Ford devises a scientific strategy. Based on his observations, he estimates the chemical composition in the tengu's stomach, concluding that certain substances could cause an internal explosion. The problem is that the only sufficiently vulnerable entry point is the animal's mouth, filled with metal glass teeth. Therefore, Ford says the insertion has to be some kind of trick that uses the monster's biological defenses to insert the bomb. At the same time, General Horn is speaking with the Prime Minister about a possible evacuation of the coastline. He says he will intercept the Siau while still offshore, but asks for patience, reminding them that no one has dealt with this kind of thing before. To his dismay, the minister mentions Billy Ford's name and orders the general to speak with him. Reluctantly, Horn calls the businessman and listens to his hypotheses. He thinks it's very unlikely that an animal of that size would move on solid ground, which undermines the theory that its destination is the Topo volcano. Ford says that part of the destruction will be the liquefaction of the island's soil. He also explains that the Siau's body is made of practically indestructible materials and its mouth is the only weak point. Horn lets him send his plan, but does not seem too convinced. He also orders the businessman to keep his team away from the battlefield, as their deaths could reflect poorly on the Navy. Ford promises to obey those orders, and as soon as he hangs up the phone, he begins to plan exactly the opposite. While Riley prepares the last of the drones to transport the deadly cocktail, Horn fires a sonic weapon at the tengu. The only effect achieved is the monster's irritation, which immediately sinks a boat with one of its slaps. Horn orders a ceasefire until everyone is rescued from the water. Then, Lieutenant Maxwell draws his attention to something flashing on the radar, already guessing it is Ford's drone. Furious, Horn sends a team to Benthic's headquarters to arrest everyone involved and even authorizes the use of force if necessary. Now the drone is very close to the target, and Riley is getting more and more nervous about the idea that he cannot fail. At that moment, Ford sees the soldiers arriving and tells the young people to flee, but the two refuse to jeopardize the future of humanity out of fear of jail. The exact moment the countdown reaches 0 and the drone hits the monster's mouth, the special forces cut the power to the building, leaving the three wondering if the plan worked. To make matters worse, Sarah calls Ford just then, and the commander confiscates the phone before he can speak to her. Meanwhile, Horn is shocked by what he sees in the sea. The unbeatable monster that has resisted all his weapons is turning belly up like a defeated cockroach. However, the problem is far from over, as the tengu begins to lay eggs before succumbing. Desperate, Horn calls Ford and explains the mess he has caused. He says this must have been a species preservation reflex and warns that these hatchlings will also look for food as soon as they hatch. Horn refuses to release Ford's team but orders them brought to him to help contain the calamity. The first egg falls in the middle of a park in Auckland, and the shell breaks right after, revealing a creature that looks like a dragon. Another egg lands right in the path of the military vehicle transporting the detained scientists. Two officers get out of the car to investigate the threat, and the dragon hatches right in front of them, already demonstrating its resistance to bullets. Its young age does not interfere with its ability to breathe fire or the distance it can fly. Landing on the hood, it shatters the front glass with one of its wings, hitting the driver as well. Given the gravity of the situation, the commander opens the door and lets the prisoners escape, narrowly avoiding the flames. She herself is not so lucky when she tries to confront the monster and ends up engulfed by the fire. The three scientists run into a tunnel, but the dragon closely follows them and manages to hit Riley. Charisse panics at the horrible fate of her friend, and Ford has to drag her along to ensure her safety. However, the tunnel's exit is locked, and contrary to what they thought, they are not safe out of the flames' reach, as the dragon also spits lava. Then Ford kicks the grate open, and they take shelter behind a rock. Charisse breathes a sigh of relief when she sees the creature flying away, but her peace disappears when she spots another egg a few meters away. Fortunately, Sarah calls again and arranges to pick up the two by helicopter. The reunion is sad, as Ford has to tell her they lost Riley. When Rena begins to explain about the walking mountain, Ford asks how they will know if the new Siau won't be even worse. Rena assures them that its role is to defend humans from the tengu and says that the history of the two has been passed down through generations for millennia. The only reason for the lack of documentation is that the last battle occurred before the invention of writing. She argues that the tengu has already been defeated by much more primitive civilizations because they chose not to ignore the lessons of the past. Since Rena has practically prepared for this moment her entire life, her speech is quite convincing, and she knocks down all objections. Meanwhile, a flock of Tengu hatchlings is approaching the Taupo supervolcano, exactly as predicted. The New Zealand Army helicopter manages to take one down but is immediately attacked and explodes on the way down. The dragons landing cover the volcano's surface and begin digging frantically. Horn is forced to call Ford and admit that he was right. He explains that these are easier to eliminate than the mother, but the entire group unites to defend each of its members, making it impossible to take them down one by one. Bombing them all at once is also not an option, considering what is just below them. Swallowing his pride, Horn says he needs advice, and Ford says there is a solution, but he won't like to hear it. Minutes later, the team transports one of the eggs to Monster Island, as the walking mountain only awakens with the blood of the Tengu or its descendants. The specific point where this must happen is a volcano called the Eye of the Mountain, but they can't just throw the egg inside it. They will need to break it open first, and the only way to do that now is through drastic temperature changes. Therefore, they heat the egg in the mouth of the volcano and then plunge it into cold water, hoping to crack the shell. But that's not quite what happens. The shell shatters, and the dragon flies out, immediately attacking the helicopter. Everyone jumps into the water and survives the fall, but the pilot ends up eaten by the dragon before reaching the shore. The other four hide as the monster begins emitting a sound calling its siblings to defend it. Despite the fear, Rena says they cannot give up now, and Sarah agrees. The two begin to shout and wave their arms, drawing the dragon out of the sea. Ford and Charisse join them until the beast seems to accept the challenge, and they all run to the island's center, passing through various volcanic galleries. Always on their tails, the dragon fills everything in its sight with lava. This starts to cause tremors, and Ford is hit by rocks that begin to shift. The other three then witness the incredible moment when one of the mountains separates from the rest, revealing itself to be a creature of absurd proportions. They try to help Ford, and when the dragon comes to attack them, the immense paw of the walking mountain crushes it at the same moment. This provokes an immediate reaction in the rest of the brood, and the dragons all simultaneously abandon Taupo. After Ford regains consciousness, his friends begin to carry him, and everyone is amazed by the battle taking place. The walking mountain is surrounded by hundreds of dragons but manages to take out many at once, unleashing a devastating beam. In Auckland, we see the body of the Tengu floating on the beach while Susan covers the incredible case of the Tsaiju, saying that the problem now will be what to do with this behemoth. As she is saying goodbye to the viewers, the center of the Tengu opens again, and two giant wings project outward. She swiftly changes her tone and narrates every second of the turnaround. The wings begin to flap, lifting the Tengu into the air toward Monster Island, or it grabs the walking mountain by the back. Its tentacles wrap around the enemy's body as the four humans try to protect themselves. They anguish as the walking mountain seems to succumb to the deadly embrace and falls with a crash. As a last resort, Sarah suggests literally staging the legend, throwing the enemy's blood into the eye of the Tsaiju itself. With little to lose, they return to the defeated dragon and thrust a makeshift spear, with a tip made of volcanic glass, into its body. This holds the lava long enough, and Ford shoots it into the Tsaiju's eye like an arrow. The effect is instantaneous, and a strong blue glow begins to emit from within it, causing a huge explosion. The two giants practically evaporate together, and what emerges from the smoke is an egg of the walking mountain. Now, the group's mission is to protect this egg, showing gratitude for it having saved humanity.